I came across a report earlier by Vice News, and the report really raises a lot of questions about potentially very serious social tensions that are going on in society, and if they are not sufficiently dealt with, will unfortunately get worse. And I believe that these potential social tensions are coming about because we remain far too hesitant in polite society to talk about problems candidly and openly. We remain far too politically correct, and we remain far too concerned about offending people. Um, you have to have robust discussion on these things, otherwise, extremes will take hold. So, in this report, the reporter Jing Seng, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her name. Her surname is Tsjeng, so I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. But basically, she was covering a demonstration in London by a group called the Football Lads Association. And she described them as the latest movement to come out of the football terraces in Britain. They describe themselves as an organisation of football supporters who are rising against all forms of extremism. Now, the whole pitch that she took with her reports I thought was a bit unprofessional because she was clearly trying to play up a very left wing attitude, which is to try and dig into, oh, they must be racist, that sort of mantra. Now, she didn't come out and say they are racist, it wasn't quite like that, but her whole angle was to kind of go in there, and as she was walking along with them, she was basically being very opinionated and saying, they are this, they are that, and I don't think she was trying hard enough to be balanced. Now, I don't expect the journalists to just go along and agree with them, but I think what she should have done is asked them questions initially, done the interviews initially, rather than pontificating the way she was doing. What she did do is pontificate first, then do the interviews. So I thought that was unprofessional. Um, there are people, Diana, but for example, the Shadow Home Secretary, who said groups like this are going to lead to a rise in Islamophobia. Well, firstly, I have a problem with the term Islamophobia because I think it is too often used to stifle legitimate criticism of Islam. But will there be a rise in racial tensions? Will there be a rise in social tensions? Unfortunately, probably yes. And why is this happening? I think it is happening, and I think we're seeing the rise of groups like the Football Lads Associations, first time I've heard of them, because there's a very strong perception that the mainstream, for want of a better term, polite society will not discuss the problem of Pan-Islamism, at least not enough. You know, last year we really had an exceptional spate of attacks, and by my recollection, there was at least 5 of those attacks were Islamist in nature, and 1 was far right in nature. Um, Manchester, Westminster, London Bridge, Parsons Green, and there was another one I can't recall now, but there was at least 4 or 5 attacks that were Islamist in nature, resulting in multiple casualties, killed and wounded. And there was one attack that was far right in nature, which was the attack on Finsbury Park Mosque. And all those attacks were condemned. But that to me demonstrates that whilst there is a problem of far right extremism, clearly the bigger scale problem is Islamist. So I really think what we're seeing is, well, firstly, I should say one guy kind of interrupted and he took issue with what he saw as her judgmental reporting, and he didn't give the impression that he was particularly part of the group. Whether he was or not, I don't know. But he said these people are obviously upset, and you don't have a right to judge them. They're responding to terror attacks. Towards the end of the video, it got a little bit heated, and people were kind of getting annoyed with her because of the angle that she was taking. She kept getting into the business of whataboutery. Like, what about the Joe Cox thing? What about far right violence. So she was accusing them of basically, she was more or less saying you're not being consistent because they say they're against all extremism. But the point they made, at least the guy they interviewed, was, well, tell me how many of those attacks were Islamists versus far right. And they were very clear that they condemned the killing of Joe Cox. Um, and she just wasn't listening. That's the problem. She was immediately getting into, I mean, she wasn't saying it directly, but you could tell the narrative that she was going down, which was typical left wing thinking. And it's not everyone on the left, but there is a significant portion of the left and some on the right as well. I would say certain members of the Conservative Party still will not call this problem by its name. Pan-Islamism. Pan-Islamism is Islamic supremacy. That's what it is. So the guy at the beginning who kind of interrupted her because he was upset with the way she was reporting said he thought there probably were unsavoury elements among them. There were probably football hooligan types. And if I say so myself, that's an aspect I don't like about some of these neo-nationalist groups, the whole sort of paramilitary type image they have. I mean, there was an ex-veteran who was wearing his uniform. Now, whether that was to show that he'd served his country, I don't know. I'm always a bit wary of the military being used for political purposes. I mean, it's his right to do that, but soldiers are as diverse as any other group of people. You'll find right-wing soldiers and left-wing soldiers, so that's something that we need to be wary of. But it was very clear the angle she was taking with this, and I can understand why people were annoyed with her style of reporting. Because she was clearly trying to pitch like, "Oh, look at these nasty racists," and she didn't say that. But at one point, she said, "Oh, but I'm an immigrant. What do you mean by these communities?" And because the guy had mentioned Muslim communities, and he was making the point that they need to recognize the problem. There are too many people that are still in denial about this problem. And what he was saying was, in terms of um, Islamist terrorists and Islamist extremists, if they're British born, they should serve jail sentence here. And if they're foreign born, they should be deported. Now, I don't see what's so unreasonable about that. I don't see that as being particularly far right. The problem with some of these neo-nationalist groups is they do end up collectively attacking all Muslims, and sometimes their ideology, and if you look at their sort of forums, it is full of pretty nasty bile, despite what they might say on camera. So I don't entirely trust these groups. I'm not sympathetic to these groups. But the point the regressive left need to understand is these groups galvanize when they are silent, and they are shamefully silent when it comes to Islamic extremism, which is a bit ironic because the sort of poison that Islamic extremism comes out with, its extreme homophobia, its extreme misogyny, its anti-Semitism, are areas where the left were traditionally very active on. So there's a real paradox there because they're virtue signaling and they think that criticizing and acknowledging Islamism means that you hate Muslims. Not at all. There are a lot of reformist Muslims, secular Muslims, who know this is a problem. Those people need support. And that's where neo-nationalist groups are not particularly helpful, because they are not acknowledging that either. Um, but it's infuriating how, I mean, put it this way, vigils have their place. I'm not dismissing them. It's a moment of reflection and a somber moment to think of those who have been killed. But vigils alone are not enough. Why is it that when there is a demonstration against Islamic extremism, it's always the case of, oh, they must be far right? Yes, some of those people might be far right. Yes, some of those people might be ultra nationalists, etc. But we have a problem in this country, and we need to accept that there is a problem. Um, and we need to call the problem what it is. You cannot deal with a problem unless you call it by its name. In this case, it is pan-Islamist extremism. And I do believe, at least in terms of the physical threat, that is a graver problem than far-right extremism. But they both feed off each other. And it's a vicious cycle. And regressives do not understand this. And it's so, so frustrating because when they make vigils, that's fine. Vigils have their place. But there has to be an acknowledgement that vigils alone aren't going to stop this problem. And yes, I totally agree, we need to unite as a society, etc., etc. But you have to recognise the ideology. And the problem is so many on the left will not do it. The likes of Jeremy Corbyn will say things that we condemn this terrorist attack, but he will never ever usher the words Islamic extremism. Why not? It's absolute moral cowardice. I'm not just targeting Jeremy Corbyn, but he is a potential Prime Minister in waiting. But there's others. They will not utter the words Islamic extremism. Why not? It's complete cowardice. And yet they would have no problem talking about far right extremism. So why the lack of consistency? Anyway, I'll put a link to that report and make of it what you will. Um, just to be clear, I'm not endorsing the Football Lads Association. I don't know anything about this organisation, and they may well have some unsavoury elements. I don't like a whole hooligan-esque image. I think it's a bad image. Um, and I do believe that very often these ultra-nationalist groups end up just being against all Muslims, which is stupid. But there is a problem. Pan-Islamism is a scourge on humanity, and we need to recognise that. How many massacres is it going to take for the regressive left to wake up?